Listen, yeah, we've got a New York audience tonight, and you've created a movie that is definitely set in New York. Marilyn, talk about that a little bit.
There's nothing I love more than telling a New York story. Um, this city just gives birth to so much art and so much energy. And I think for me, it's always felt like the most exciting place in the world. And as in my first documentary, Mad Hot Ballroom, this is another story of uh, dreams coming true in the best city in the world.
And students, I'm sure many of you have seen Mad Hot Ballroom, but for those of you who haven't, it's really worth seeing, and worth seeing with a box of tissues, because you'll just cry your eyes out in the last few minutes of that film. Trevor and Ellen, it not only is this a New York story, it's a story about inclusion. Could you tell us, the audience, about what that means, and why Sesame Street grew out of the civil rights movement?
Yeah, well, we have to thank your book, Michael, for cluing us in, because when we read your book, it was really what inspired us to do the documentary. And what we didn't know, there was so much we all think we know about Sesame Street. We grew up with it, but in reading the book, there was a lot we learned we didn't know, and we thought how interesting and amazing that would be to see if others felt the same way. And one of the things that we learned was that, Joan Gans Cooney, who co-founded the show with Lloyd Morissette, was directly inspired by the civil rights movement. It was the late 60s. She was working in public television. And when Lloyd posed this question to her, do you think you can use the medium of television to teach children?
Yeah.
She's like, I don't know, but I want to try. And, her drive was this idea of bringing education to all children, but specifically children of color living in inner cities who, due to race and poverty, systemic racism, did not have the same access to readiness to school, and also the tools they needed to stay in school. And that's a really important driver to how they built the show and what her mission was.
Yeah, because children at that time, this is the late 1960s, were sort of in two camps. Some kids who received the benefit of being read to at night, and had record players in their house and had visits to the library, and kids who didn't have that. And it created this gap in education, and it created a really unfortunate situation for some preschoolers who arrived at the schoolhouse door for kindergarten already behind their peers. And so these folks decided that they would use television to try to address that gap. Were they successful, Ellen?
There's been many studies done, as you well know. And I think in the early years, in some of our research, there's a woman who was very critically important to reaching the audience that they wanted to serve. And that was Evelyn Payne Davis. She was hired by the workshop to come in charge of community outreach. She was the founder of 100 Black Women in New York City. And her job was to manage the team of employees that essentially would go out through media buses and into classrooms to ensure that this program that was being created for all children, but specifically also to help children of color, that it was doing it. That was about the inclusion that you mentioned earlier. It's all well and good to have intentionality about what your programming is, but in order to succeed, you have to ensure that you are creating something that the community wants to receive and receives. And that's what she did. And, about how it worked, yes. There's so many studies that have been done. There was a study that was done recently saying that was hard to get.
Yeah, they didn't know specifically how many kids had benefited from watching Sesame Street, because they couldn't find any kids that hadn't actually watched Sesame Street. There was no focus group. There was no pool to do the test against. Everybody watched Sesame Street. And ultimately what they found was that, the water table rose for everyone. So definitely that target group was served, but then also, everybody else came along with. So.
Yeah, and I will only mention there's a very interesting study done by the American Society of Economics. It was a very light read that I read while we were preparing for the film, and it was around home ownership. And they were trying to correlate the show to how people did in life, right? And they one of the things that they measured was home ownership. And when they looked at it by by race and ethnicity, they showed that if they could correlate Sesame Street viewing, that they saw that there was a higher rate in home ownership among people of color that watched the show, which I thought was fascinating. If anybody wants the article, I'll send it to you.
And it explains why Joan Gans Cooney was so firm in her belief that Gordon and Susan needed to own the brownstone
Yes.
on Sesame Street, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And she says in the documentary, the people in the system who have the power read, and it was so important to ensure that, that it sounds so basic, but but it was incredibly fundamental.
Yeah,
and something that we as a culture were not doing for everyone.
And I think that's one of the things that was so powerful about the show, is that these were people that showed the world the way that they wanted it to be. And I think that's such a unique way to do it. There was no pretense about it. They were just, to your point, Susan and Gordon owned this brownstone. Everybody lived together on the same street. There was interaction. There was different styles. There was different communities, and they were all coming together. And that's what the creators really wanted our world to be, and still work to do. But that's such a powerful thing to introduce to children.
Indeed. Yeah. Marilyn, for the students, you as a documentarian did one great film that didn't have source material, that you had to do all the original reporting and research and shooting as it evolved, and another great film where you had source material. Please talk about the differences as a documentarian addressing both cases.
Certainly. So my first film, Mad Hot Ballroom, which is about 3 sets of New York City kids who learn and compete in ballroom dancing, and it culminates in a big citywide competition, was a very interesting project, because you're shooting a scenario that is unfolding in front of the camera, and there is no way to know what's going to happen. There is no script to follow. There's no net under the tightrope that you're walking on. And so we built the story as we went along, and that was really fascinating. And I had the good fortune to be able to bring my editor the things I had shot each day. And we would look at the material together. We'd say, this is great. And she would say to me, try to see if you can get someone to say this, or maybe we can take this in this direction. Or I look at this little scene I created, and we were building it as we went along, which was fantastic. A film like Street Gang, which is a historical document of something that has occurred, is such a different animal. But in many ways, all documentaries, even this one, which was so reliant on archival material and the home movies that people had, the stills that people had hidden under their beds for decades, all of the news footage that we captured and gathered to tell the story, combined with interviews that we were doing today, documentaries have this thing in common. Even though one is more structured with a lot of outside material and one is completely in the fate of God, documentaries have a way of sort of dictating the story to you in a funny way. And that's what is so fantastic about this storytelling form of nonfiction filmmaking that I love so much. I think both methods of making documentary films are exciting and fantastic. And now, of course, there's a lot of hybrid documentaries being made with elements that are unfolding in front of the camera and elements that are scripted even. And, the world is such an exciting place, and documentaries are as dramatic, as funny, as exciting as scripted films, but they have one thing that makes them even better, I think. What they're talking about really happened, and that's fantastic.
Yeah. So as storytellers, you and I faced the same dilemma, in that almost all of the major characters in the book and in the film are dead. And so as a filmmaker, how do you bring the dead back to life?
you talk to the people that knew them the best, if you can. In the case of Street Gang, of course, Jim Henson, we spoke to his children, all of whom had not only the business knowledge of what their father left them, the legacy of his company and how they continue to bring that forward, but their memories as children, watching as their father would disappear for days at a time and come back because he was so in love with this project that was emerging in New York called Sesame Street. It's difficult sometimes to really convey the heart and soul of a human being. And the best possible way is to talk to people that loved that person, who really knew them and loved them. And that's really the most effective way. Another character who this was it was a magnificent to speak to the daughters of John Stone, who miraculously, not that many people were aware of John Stone and John Stone's role in the creation of Sesame Street and in all of the big ideas around it, setting it in the brownstone, using a New York City street, all of these things. And John was a complicated character. And so by speaking to all the people that know him, of course, interviews with Jim and John from back in the day help as well. But I think that a vital piece of that is talking to those who really knew them, loved them, worked with them. It's a wonderful way to bring someone to life.
Marilyn, as a filmmaker, why were you so sure early on that you didn't want a narrator and you didn't want to have additional like animation and this and that you wanted the story to come from eyewitnesses or the children of eyewitnesses?
It's more difficult to work without a narrator because you have to find the way to piece one piece of dialogue to the next. You have to make the connection using the voices of the characters in the film. But it is, to me, the most exciting way to create documentaries. I think the narration thing it has its place, and it's certainly, we've all grown up with narrated documentaries, but to hear a story being told from the mouths of those who were the participants, to hear it all come from the voices of characters, I think is so much more human, so much more intimate, and so much more fulfilling.
Thank you. Ellen and Trevor, as producers, you had a bounty of riches, it seemed to me, once you made a deal with Sesame Workshop to be able to use archival footage from the show. But it must have been very difficult to figure out which clips to use. Could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. I mean, I think that's the interesting part is that, like Marilyn said, trying to find the gems of those stories and bring these characters to life. Obviously, the archival that we had, in addition to talking to Kate and Polly Stone and talking to the Henson kids, having that unseen footage, that treasure trove that we were able to access of footage that was shot by art director named Victor DiNapoli. And that footage he was a cast member. So, he was part of the gang and, had full access to the set and everything else when he was filming a sort of proto documentary that never ultimately, got released to our benefit. But I think that, just trying to find things that were interconnected. I mean, obviously, some of the footage shows sketches that we all know very well, like the snowman sketch. And to be able to see behind the scenes on that, some of those became easy picks. Grover and the customer when they're, he's the waiter. That stuff is easy stuff. But then you go another level deeper, and some of it also is about interconnected with what you find outside of the workshop in archival. And Rich Remsburg was our archival producer who did an absolutely
amazing,
ridiculously amazing job.
Yeah.
Probably the best archival producer in the business as far as I'm concerned. He found everything but Ellen's lost set of keys. Maybe he'll find that one day too. But I mean, Rich found everything from the interviews around Mississippi, to the Send Your Kid to the Ghetto PSA.
And I want to orient it for this audience because I know you guys haven't seen the film yet, and we're so excited for you to see it. But I think it's important to orient the audience around the film, because when you talk about, and to get to what Trevor's talking about with this archival footage, with the embarrassment of riches, as you so rightly put it, Michael, that we had with your book, your resources, what we were able to work with the workshop in, we had to decide early on what story were we going to tell, like to Marilyn's point. And it very quickly crystallized for us that we wanted to tell the origin story, and we wanted the focus to be around this gang of humans who came together at a time our country was facing very systemic change and problems, global problems as well. And they answered a call to do something and to use creativity, their intelligence, to make something happen to better the rest of us. And they did it through the medium of television with Muppets and humans and love and care. And that was really the core. So from there, you had to be extremely choiceful. We were so lucky to get this Denopoli footage. You all will see it. We had to be extremely choiceful about putting in this archival to tell that story, because it has to go back to that theme. Who was this gang? How did this gang influence all the things that happened? This amazing amalgamation of perfect humans that came together to make this show. And so, and going back to what Trevor was referring to, and there's John Stone, who Joan Gans Cooney brought in from Captain Kangaroo, which at the time was the children's television show. Yeah. And, she said, convinced him to come out of retirement essentially and do this show. And he saw this PSA, which was called,
Send Your Kids to the Ghetto.
Right. And I'll let you talk about that a little bit.
It's essentially a shot about, shot on a Harlem street, and about the conditions of kids in that time. And that's when he sort of had that aha moment of, I need to set this show on a Harlem street, on the brownstone, on the stoop, because that's where all the excitement is. Now, we found that piece through the Sesame archive, through this Denopoli footage. He does a little, interview, as Marilyn was talking about.
We found out about the
PSA.
Yeah.
And that's part of how the storytelling happens. You're getting, like Marilyn said, the voice of that person is what's driving your narrative. But then you have to fill in all the bits. And it's great to have fun bits with Muppets, but that's not the story. Like Ellen said, that's not the story of how this all was created and how it became. So Rich, our archival producer, hunting down these pieces of video antiquity, and they really are. It took about, and I'm not kidding, it took about 3 years from the moment that we knew we identified that we needed to find this PSA to the time where I got the final signed contract of, yes, you're allowed to use this PSA. That took about 3 years, maybe a hair under, but and it literally could not have happened any faster. It just, some of these archival places, these are deep archives, and just identifying these things is incredibly tricky. And, the same thing as I was saying before about Mississippi. There was a period of time where Sesame Street was banned in Mississippi because it had a multiracial cast.
An integrated neighborhood.
And the public television system of Mississippi, they did not like that, and they decided not to air it. And Rich went deep into the archives of ABC and found all the camera masters of this amazing piece that was done on, at the time, about this very subject. And it's like magic, and then it all gets edited together, and Ben Gold, who was our editor, did a shockingly phenomenal job of putting these pieces together, and you see this story unfold, and it feels like you're there, and it feels like you're witnessing it all firsthand. And that's one of the things that, as a filmmaking team, we were all very concerned about, and something that Marilyn did so well was, we really wanted the audience to understand what it felt like to be on set, and not just to get the information, but to also get the feeling of what it was like to be developing something that was so groundbreaking. Long
I
answer.
think that sometimes when you make a film like this, especially a film about Sesame Street, it's a big burden almost, because this is something that's already so beloved. We're not selling the idea of Sesame Street to anyone. Everybody knows. I was in a restaurant with a friend saying, this documentary, there's not one person in all of the street that we see that doesn't know already the subject matter of this documentary. It's a little daunting. But I think the way to approach a story like this is almost to separate yourself from it and think of it as this is a story of these adults. This is a story of a group of adults who set out to buck the odds and change the world. And this is a story of this man, John Stone, who was creative but difficult. And he was, he had such high ideals and such a moral center. This is a story about a man named Jim Henson, who was a genius. And he had so many ideas that were just crackling out of his brain. And where was he going to focus it? He had these Muppets, but he was also a filmmaker and he was also an artist. And if they put their, to me, thinking of it that way, a story about this group of adults who had a very adult objective, I think it helps to separate yourself a little bit from the set. The magic of Sesame Street bubbles out because it is so special. What they created was such a jewel. But I think all of us that told this story, by thinking of it through another lens, saved the storytelling from being a love poem to Sesame Street. Rather, it was a story of the struggle, the story of the creation, the story of the triumph in a way. And I think that is a very helpful thing for us in telling the story.
Well, students, one thing they may not be teaching you is that you're going to experience pain as filmmakers. It's unavoidable. Trevor and
Michael, you're not supposed to
Marilyn,
you're not supposed to tell them that.
well,
it's like children.
I'm a truth teller.
It's
You're
like
going to
children.
experience pain.
If you
So-
tell people about having kids, then they'll never have kids. So
Well-
don't tell them.
All right, Trevor and Ellen, let's start with you. There were some painful choices that you had to make along the way. And a lot of it has to do with the stories that you can't tell
Mm.
for reasons of time and other reasons. Talk about that, please.
Sure. I'm going to say one thing ahead of time when we're talking about pain, and two things that I want to impart, and this is as good a time as any. When they say that patience is a virtue, they're not kidding in any way, shape, or form. And it's more than just a virtue, especially in independent film and television. It is a necessity, and you have to have a ridiculously strong fortitude to just be able to hang on and keep hanging on. You need to, because the end result is fantastic, but it's very hard to wait. And waiting is not something I do well. Both Ellen, Marilyn, and Michael will tell you I don't like to wait on anything, but you have to be able to have the patience to see it through all the way. And it's a long road. The other item I will mention is a number that I want everybody to remember. That number is 18,963, probably 64 by now. That's the amount of emails that I have saved for this film. From the time that I started it, all the conversations with Michael, all the conversations with Marilyn, all the conversations with all of our partners and everyone else. That's a lot of email.
I think 5,000 are from me.
At a minimum, 5,000 are from you. It's probably more, but that's the thing. It is a very, it takes a lot of you as producers, as directors, as filmmakers, as editors to really dig in and live with it for as long as a project takes to go from the idea, which is way over here, through the execution and the distribution. That's all big, big stuff. I mean, from a story side, luckily there's DVDs and iTunes extras. So, you guys can see some of the stuff that hit the floor, but,
And what I'd like to say to that too, Michael, is, you know, we did not have the ability like your book did to get into so many members of the gang. And, you know, we got to talk to a lot of people who were part of making this show then and now. And that was an extreme privilege for us to get to talk to these folks. And one of the things, though, is that you can't, in a 107-minute movie, mention everybody and have a, you know, something that everyone can follow from a story perspective. So that was the other choiceful decision that we had to make in the storytelling. And, you know, Marilyn said this very early on, which was, you know, we had this triad of Joan, Jim, and John that we could build the gang around and the storyline, you know. So, and that was, so we were choiceful in pulling in people to tell the story of everyone. And then we took time at the end of the film in the credits to mention everybody we possibly could because there's so many people. And I think, you know, so there's a lot of things that were pain points that we weren't able to talk about. You know, I think about like Jeff Moss, like, you know, we talk a lot about Joe Raposo, you know, I mean, Joe was a musical genius, you know, Jeff Moss also wrote
so much,
you know, Rubber Ducky and, you know, all these amazing songs that were, you know, iconic. And, you know, there's just so many people. And, but that's one of the hard choices you have to make as a filmmaker. You have to make, you want the goal of the film to come across, and you also want to honor the people. And so we definitely had to make some hard choices.
Okay. Marilyn, my friend, talk about pain.
Yeah. So every movie is horribly painful. It's the nature of the beast. And scripted films are also extremely painful. But you suffer in a very particular way with documentaries because you lay in bed and you're wondering, is it okay to reveal this negative thing about this person? Is this the way to tell this scene? Should I not have included that? Or should we go deeper with that other thing? Because you have no script and no net. So it's very, it's maddening, really. You know,
we're laughing because we're all thinking about the multiple conversations we would have because, you know, our rough cut was 2.5 hours long. You know, I mean, it's
3 hours almost.
Almost 3 hours. Yeah. I mean, you know, it is incredibly hard to make these decisions and to, you know, like Marilyn, we talk about this all the time. It's like losing children. Like, you're like, I'm cutting this piece out. It's like throwing out a child.
And also you want to tell a fully rounded story of a person that includes the negatives, the dark sides of them. And how far do you go with that? And you know, there's just so many variables in every single scene, and cutting out scenes and including others, and what do I leave out, and always with the knowledge that this subject matter is already a baby that people adore, and how you handle it.
And I think that's like
baby.
And that's the weird part, is that it's funny. I think a lot of people, we've seen a lot of, it's so true. We've seen a lot of people say, why didn't you include this person, or why didn't you include that person, or did you focus on this or focus on that? And it's all the things that everybody has said is 100%.
Why didn't you do a docuseries?
Why didn't you do a docuseries? Well, there's a lot of financial mechanics that go into that. That is not always, you know,
but it's also that's the story easy. We wanted to tell.
But I think also some of it's as simple as the footage doesn't exist. You know, it's like, it's one thing when, you know, as Marilyn said, it's all movie making is hard, but if you have a scripted piece, you know, your characters say whatever you want them to say, and you don't have that luxury in documentary. You can go back and ask them, as Marilyn did several times to some of our interview subjects, would you mind saying this in a slightly different way? But when it comes to, you know, footage about a specific person, if there's no media to support it, there's no story there. And that's a challenge, because it seems like we're just, as filmmakers, to maybe some audience members, making arbitrary decisions about who gets in and who doesn't. But there's so many other decision points that are critical, that are all the stuff that you don't see behind the scenes that help to inform what's even possible to include.
You know, in life, some of the most interesting things happen in secret. and in dark corners,
Yeah.
and people don't witness it, and certainly they don't film it. And
That's so
some
you,
of the
by
most
the way.
interesting things are
Hilarious.
just not able to be shown.
Well, a couple of things here. I'm noticing that as light falls in Davidson, North Carolina, I'm starting to look like one of the subjects from To Catch a Predator on Dateline. So I apologize for that. And I also wanted to say here that another point, students, that they probably don't tell you in school, that people who create source material, writers, can be a total ass pain. And I tried so hard not to be throughout the marathon.
Sadly, that was
creation.
did not.
Okay.
You were. Sorry, you failed.
Stop. Untrue. Go ahead, Michael.
No, and it's a tricky dance, right? And sometimes when people are adapting source material for theatrical film or documentary, they like to push the writer the hell out of the way, right? Just pay him, write him a check, and see ya. But you were so gracious to me as filmmakers to allow me to be part of the process, and I was very careful to walk the line, to be there for you when you needed me, but to not intrude on Marilyn ever, because the director has to be able to tell her story the way that she sees it. Correct, Marilyn?
No, that's very true. But Michael, I remember one conversation I had with you, and I was, Michael, tell me about some of the early conflicts. I mean, you were always this wealth of knowledge. You spent so many years researching this story. There's almost no one else on earth that has this amount of material in his head. I mean, you know this story inside out. You know all the players. I have never asked you about one person that you were like, who's that? Never. Never.
True.
Having you as a resource was really fantastic. Really fantastic.
Well, trust is the mortar of every great relationship, and I think we had that with each other as a team. In fact, with the entire production team. And we should take a minute to really praise the ensemble here. Trevor and Ellen,
Absolutely.
Talk for a minute about that, please.
Our film gang?
Yes, your film gang.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I just want to echo what Marilyn said first, Michael, which is that, working with you and getting the access to your resources, your research, the introductions you made for us to people that you had interviewed, that was invaluable. And it was such a critical part. And we were so pleased that the direction that this was going in was what you liked, because this was this was your baby, this was your work. So thank you for that. Sure. And we adore you.
We've had a long relationship, so I get to razz you every opportunity I get, including in front of 131 other people. So, yeah.
But but to our gang, oh my gosh, our producer in New York, Lisa Diamond, incredible producer who worked. We had a production office that was live in New York for little over a year when we were doing our interviews, almost 2. I can't even remember anymore. What day is it?
We've been working on this since 1865. So the dates kind of get a little jumbled.
I guess it was. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Anyway, Lisa Diamond, incredible asset to our team. Luke Isaboler, who is our cinematographer, incredible. Ben Gold, our editor. Ben.
I need to just say one extra thing here about, I'll say a little extra thing about everybody. We don't have that much time, but Ben really helped to put all this together. And I think that that's something from, which is all editors obviously have a great sense of story, but I think especially with a great documentary editor like Ben, to really sort of land the plane with us, and it was over such a long period of time that he did just a fantastic job. And Gil Choi, who was our associate editor, who was really with us from the beginning. Yeah. Gil is like Superman, and is still helping us, on various little things here and there. So everybody in the room.
Rich Remsburg, we've mentioned, archival producer, amazing. Ruby Nitzberg, who did assistant on archival she was amazing. Emily Diolio, who also was assistant on editing. Who were we missing, Marilyn?
That's it from The Office.
Yeah.
And then Todd Griffin.
Oh yeah,
right?
Todd Griffin, our
Oh
composer.
my God, our composer.
I mean,
Todd Griffin.
and I, you know, a lot of people, when you see the film, you know, there's a very moving moment about Mr. Hooper and Mr. Hooper's death, which is pretty obviously a very famous moment. But I also have to give a lot of credit to Todd Griffin, our composer, for that scene, because that's a real testament to how music and film can take an already powerful scene and just totally throw it over the wall. Because I still get choked up, and I've seen the movie like 763 times. So it's Todd's music on this has just been, it was just a phenomenal asset, and it just bound it all together in such a cohesive way, as music does, as music has to. But that was, you know, it's just awesome. And everybody that we've had is family.
There was a lot of love in the room
Yeah.
on this film.
Yeah. How important is it for people to come and see it in theaters?
Mm.
There is nothing in the world as scary and wonderful as to sit in a theater with people and watch something that you were part of making. And, you know, it's really fantastic. And I do think that all this crazy pandemic stuff aside, you know, to sit in a room with people and share an experience like watching a film as an audience member is so special. I really do hope that movies are here to stay in the theaters. I know the world is moving away from that, but I think it's so important. I think it's so important, especially a movie like this, because everyone will walk in, I think, with a little bit of recognition of what they're going to see, and with a shared experience that they bring from childhood. So I'm actually going tomorrow to see it in a theater with some friends, and I can't wait to have that experience. I just can't wait.
I mean, storytelling is, it's ingrained in our DNA. I mean, it's like, it's what makes us human beings, is that we tell these stories. And, you know, it's all the way back to prehistoric times. I mean, this is a cave painting on a wall, and it's supposed to be seen in the dark, and it's supposed to be, you know, with a group of people. And I think, you know, the light has changed. The light source is now LED or laser or whatever the projection choice is of the day. But that's how it's supposed to be. You know, we're supposed to be looking at this with a group of people. And as soon as it is safe, you know, we hope everybody goes out and, you know, and sees it. It's in a bunch of New York theaters this weekend. Pretty soon it's going to be in a bunch of Brooklyn theaters too. I know it's at the Quad. So it's, you know, and all over the country. I don't think there's a state that's not playing it. So
Name and school and your favorite Sesame Street character, please.
Wait,
Name
okay, so my school is Northwestern University, studying theater. And my favorite character is Big Bird. I gotta go. And also, shoot, that kind of threw me off. Anyways, it's great to meet you guys. Thank you for being here. Michael, happy birthday. You guys are awesome. First question, it's kind of directed towards Marilyn, but if you guys have any wisdom to add on to it, that's cool too. And also along the pain route, Marilyn, you mentioned how on your first, or at least your other documentary, how in Mad Hot Ballroom, how, you know, a lot of times you were recording during the day and editing like all night. So I was just wondering, like, when do you guys sleep? And in addition to that, like, how do you guys balance all that work? And is that common to occur in documentaries where you're working all day and most through the night? And how do you balance that?
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much for that question. I wasn't literally editing the same night that I was shooting, but I would go into the edit room. What I meant was I wasn't shooting and then finish shooting the entire film and then edit it. We were editing as we were going to tell the story. But having said that, you do try to sleep if you can, but a movie sort of consumes you in a very particular way. And I think that's proper. It's kind of horrible and painful, but it's proper. And if it's not consuming you, I don't think that it is maybe the story that you should be telling. It lives inside of you, and you're always trying to work it out, trying to figure it out. Is this the best way? Is that the best way? Should I have done this? Is this a great thing to try to go for? And that's the beauty of it, really. You balance your life as much as you can, but the nature of filmmaking is that it consumes you. And I think that's just the way it is.
Your name and
Hi.
school and favorite Sesame
Connie.
Street character, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm Connie. I'm a 2020 film grad from Hofstra University here in New York. And I love Cookie Monster. Yeah, thank you so much. I love documentaries. I'm so excited to watch your film. And my question is, since you talk about how much archival footage there is in all the emails, so I was wondering, what was the production timeline look like? Was there a lot of research? Did you jump right in to do the interviews? Yes.
Well, it's a great question. And I think every film is different. For us, it was, we had a lot of stops and starts on this film. Again, when you're an independent filmmaker and you have issues like funding and you have contracts. And I would say a big suggestion is take all the legal clinics your schools offer.
Everyone.
And learn a lot about rights and clearances, depending on what any kind of documentary you want to do. It's critically important, doing releases with your interview subjects, all that good stuff. But, we had a lot of stops and starts. I mean, this film overall was about 5.5 years in the making, for various reasons, but once you're in it, you are scheduling, we know, obviously we had a production timeline, especially in the last sort of run of everything, because we were really looking to get things done, and then COVID hit. So then that throws your timeline off. So for about a year, but, so it is, it's ever variable, but I think the thing is that it's depending on who you're doing the work for. If you're doing the work for yourself, what your timelines are. It's incredibly important that you build it around what kind of budget you have to make what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because that is, and doing really good research around what that looks like. What is it that you want to accomplish? Is it a film with a lot of music? What do music rights really mean? And what is that going to cost you as a production? And how long is it,
by the way,
and how long is it going to take you to accomplish that? We were talking earlier about this PSA, which we wanted to license. It was we thought a really important part of the film to show the inspiration to, one of the creators of the show, and it took 3 years to get the final rights, and so, but I would say in all of it, you have to have an incredible determination to not give up and fight for the work that you want to do, because everywhere you turn, there's going to be some roadblock that's going to come in your way. Yeah. And sometimes it's yourself that is going to push you from doing the work, because it's not easy. There's the understanding that filmmaking is glamorous and exciting, and it is all of that too, because there's nothing more incredible than doing something that you really love, but it's a lot of work behind the scenes to stay true to something, especially in the world of independent filmmaking, because you are your only champion. And you need to be that champion on a consistent basis. I
mean, I would say if we took out the starts and the stops as a direct answer, probably 2.5 to 3 years for this one. I would say, Mary, I don't know if you agree. I think that's about right.
I think that's about
somewhere
right.
in that range. Like, we took almost a whole year pause for a host of reasons in the production process. So, that's when we as producers get calls from both Michael and from Marilyn saying, "Are we shooting next week?" "No, not quite yet. Just give us a little bit more time. Thank you so much for calling." Yeah.
Hi, my name is Javantal, and I'm a grad student at the New School here in New York City. And my favorite character is Big Bird, no questions asked. So I have two questions. The first one is directed towards Trevor, and the other one is Ellen and Marilyn, all three of you. So first one is, you talked about looking for archival footage. Was there anything that you found really surprised you, and or like it clicked, all right, this is going to be a part of the, the whole documentary? So that's my first question. The second is, and you also talk about Trevor, patience is the virtue. Were there times, and it's for all three of you, were there times where you guys ran into, okay, this is not working, and you had to like pivot the whole situation and start over again? And what kept you going with that?
Well, I'm going to answer that just
real
quickly.
Please, go ahead.
And I'm going to let Trevor, I'm going to let Trevor answer it. But what I am going to say is that without Trevor's true determination and his, you were like infatigable, is that even the right way to say it, to keep it going? Because, you're, yes, the answer is yes, we hit all of that. And I want to give Trevor all the credit in the world to continually saying that we're going to make it work. It's going to happen. And without his continued drive on that, I will admit freely that I don't know that it would have been the case, because he just was always looking for the solution. So I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to let him speak to it. But I want to give him credit for that, because it's an incredibly important factor, again, especially in independent filmmaking. I think in anything, but particularly in this. So go ahead.
It tries you. I mean, you have an idea. And I think that's maybe part of it, because even my own mom has asked me, like, why didn't you just quit? Because I would have quit a long time ago. I don't understand. I don't know where you come from, child, because I, and I think the answer for me, and I've tried to figure it out for myself, because there have been some, you talk about, not sleeping. There have been a lot. I mean, Ellen and I still like wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking about like some part of this film and the production process within it. I think it's a little bit of hubris, but when you have a really good idea that in your heart is a really, really good idea, or you found a story that you just know more than anything else in the world, it has to be told, or it has to be retold. In the case of Street Gang, you just press on. You just, it's a Sisyphean task, but you just keep pushing the rock, because you know that eventually it's going to go over to the other side. And honestly, for everybody that's watching today, the film industry is a grind. I mean, it is a grinder. It is designed to chew you up and spit you out. It wants to separate, the strong from the weak, because it's so hard. And Marin's laughing, and she knows it's not, but that's the truth. That's the hard part, is that you have to believe in your own vision. And the really harder part, like the most hard part, is when do you give up on your own vision, where you figured out like, wow, this really isn't going to happen. Maybe I got to try something else, so I don't keep dumping all of my energy, time, resources, money, life force, energy down a hole. That's the question that only you can answer. But for me, for this, and also having the team, I wanted to make sure, we all wanted to make sure that this happened for everybody.
Yes.
Because this isn't a documentary. It is a documentary for us. It's a documentary for you. It's a documentary for 50 years of people and generations of people that have watched this show. And that's, I think, you can't let those people down, like the whole world.
And we don't want to let our film gang down. We don't want to let Michael down.
I would let Michael down. But other than that, just a quick answer to your other question was just, is there a piece of archive that we found? This is a really weak answer. Wasn't 100% archive. There were bloopers. There's a lot of bloopers, I'm not gonna lie. And they're magic and they're fantastic. And it just, I think more than that, it also just showed the family that was
humanity. Yeah.
The gang that put the show together. Because they're just people. They're making crazy jokes. They're, yucking it up. But
I remember we got this piece of archive that we were all around the monitor in the office in New York freaking out, because we knew we were going to take every single frame of it. And it was a piece that was done by ITV, I think, in Canada.
Oh, it was the CBC. That's right. Yeah.
Yes,
it was called Seeds of Sesame.
Yes. and you see young Joan Cooney, you see John Stone writing at his desk, you see the door that shuts and it says children's television workshop, all these magical things. We were like, oh my God, we're going to cannibalize this thing to death.
Oh yeah. It's like half of the whole spot is in our movie.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So it's so exciting to unearth, or someone unearths for you and gives you this little drop of gold. And
Yeah.
it's just fantastic. And I had to laugh when Trevor was talking about the film industry. It made me think that we're in the Hunger Games or something.
Oh yeah. May the odds be ever in your favor. Yeah.
Shivantul, thank you for your question.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Serena is next.
Hello, nice to meet you guys, or meet you guys. My name's
Serena.
Serena. I'm from SUNY New Paltz. My question is, after making this documentary and learning so much about Sesame Street, what do you think the future of it looks like, or even the present? You know, is it still as influential and important as it once was?
I'll take that one. And, you know, we can't, you know, obviously we became almost historians of the origin story, right? But I can tell you, I'll speak from my place of also getting to know people at the workshop now, and also having a 5-year-old. And I can say that the answer is yes. And you know, anything that has been around for a half a century is got to flex and change, you know. So the show is not the same format. It's not the same number of episodes. What was like 130 episodes a year, an hour long. I mean, it's insane when you think about original music and everything else. But, you know, when you look at the work, and I encourage everybody to take a look at the work, because they are a huge media brand in themselves, Sesame Workshop, and what they're doing internationally and in the US is so incredibly impactful for children. You know, their mission-based programming to answer and address so many things that children are dealing with, from homelessness to racial justice to
Even COVID now.
COVID, AIDS, you know, military families. I could go on. And what they do so well, and what they continue to do so well, is in loving ways help children understand the world that they're living in, and still create the world that they want to live in. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think that is the legacy and mission that they've continued to stay very closely aligned to.
All those original tenets that they built are all still there.
And Serena, the workshop continues to do research, short-term and long, on the show, and that separates it from other children's television programs. And they continue to build out the curriculum and change with the times, and I give them a lot of credit for that. Thank you for your good question, Serena.
Hello.
Hi.
My name's Jake. I'm from Ryerson University in Canada, and my favorite Sesame Street character has got to be Count Von Count. So my question was, it was just announced, I think within the past 24 hours, that there's a biopic that is in the works at Disney about Jim Henson's life. As filmmakers who have worked on a decidedly related project, what are your thoughts about this? And do you think that Disney is the right place for it to happen?
We'll let Trevor take that one.
You know, Disney is, I will say, the only place that it can happen, because there is a very deep interconnection between the Jim Henson Company and Disney. Beyond that, I would say that
it's a narrative, right?
It's a narrative. Yeah, I mean, it's a live action piece.
Yeah.
You know, there's Muppet Men was optioned a long time ago. That was, I mean, it's been in the works for quite a long time. But I think that, you know, just finding a way to tell the story of his life. He was an amazing person. He was one of my personal heroes, which you know, drew me partially to Michael's book and this whole part of the project. You know, I think that that's his vision in not only creativity, but also in business is something that really set him apart from a lot of other creators in the day. It's going to be interesting, as I'm sort of expounding extemporaneously on this, to see how they do it, because Jim was a very quiet guy. he was not like a big personality. Guy Smiley was a big personality. He was my personal favorite Muppet. You didn't ask me, Michael. Very disappointed, but that's fine. But you know, all the puppeteers had a off-camera persona and an on-camera persona. I think it's going to be very unique to see what part of the story they tell, you know, sort of
And
like
how they tell it.
and how they tell it. Because, you know,
there's going to be an amazing opportunity to use creativity in that storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about how broad his creative scope was,
Yeah.
you know, I'm excited to see it.
In 3 years when it's done.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Jake, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Emily is next. Hi, Em.
Hello, guys. My name is Emily. I go to SUNY New Paltz in New York, and my favorite Sesame Street character is Elmo.
Oh.
And my question is, what is it that's different about making children's programming compared to regular programming? Because I want to know more about that. That's something I haven't really learned a lot about in school.
You know, children's programming is actually quite difficult to produce because you are writing for a very specific time in life, you know, and it's a big responsibility to create children's programming. I mean, the people that were writing for Sesame Street, I think were very surprised when they come on board. I think a lot of people have this notion that writing for children's television is easy because it's simple language and it's you know, for a 4-year-old, for a 5-year-old, how hard can that be? And it's quite difficult. We were all sort of surprised to learn the intricacies of what a writer and producers of children's television go through. I myself have directed segments at Sesame Street, the show, and I see there's many producers and educators and psychologists in the room who are watching when you're directing Muppets or when you're directing a little segment that is seemingly a little comedic moment, a little skit about having a picnic or going to the beach. And they're so careful about every nuance of the acting, of the writing, of how it's being portrayed. It's a very complicated field.
Yeah, and I would say that if you're looking at, you know, programming today, to Marilyn's point, you know, Sesame would be, I think it's very fair to say, it's the gold standard. Not every children's television show has the depth that Marilyn's worked within and sees, because they are making sure that what they're doing with an autism puppet, for example, is just like they did back in the 60s, that it's representative of the true experience of of a child that would have autism, for example. So a researcher is on set ensuring, and they're also in doing the research to ensure the audience is receiving it. You know, in today's children's television, if you're talking about the young bridge audience, you know, you're talking about the preschool to bridge, you know, to older kids, it's very different. So preschool's programs still very much center around a curriculum or educational concepts. But then when you start to get into the older ages, it branches out. We have a children's graphic novel that we called The Not So Secret Society that was published a few years ago it's currently in development for an animated series for a bridge audience, like an 8 to 9. And it's really about understanding what the core messages in that age range that you're trying to get with the show, and ensuring that the content is appropriate. Kids tend to watch up, you know, in what they're watching, but you have to ensure that what your messaging is in writing a show and creating it works for that age range.
Right.
And then all of the other elements of putting it together, whether it's animation or live, you know, are production, right?
Yeah.
But really, when you're talking about crafting it, it's very different depending on the network, the age range, and the format of what you're trying to make.
And just as a sort of final button on that, literally all children's television is based on Sesame Street. Because every show that has a curriculum, every preschool show, every bridge show, all of it is all because of Sesame Street, unequivocally.
And there's a show right now on animated series, you know, it's called Storybots, is on Netflix. And it is, the creators of that show have said specifically, we have used Sesame Street as I mean, everyone's
model.
using Sesame Street, but they've used the backbone of how Sesame episodes are done to create their show as well, because they know it works.
Yep.
And it's what audiences respond to, which is
And for
interesting.
purposes of internships, students know that there's a whole family tree of producers of children's television in New York who got their grounding at the workshop.
Oh,
All
yeah.
kinds of people at Nickelodeon and little airplane productions and at Disney and all over the place. People who earn their stripes working at the workshop.
So how did you start in the film industry, and what advice would you give to recent film graduates?
I actually started in the film industry. Well, I was inspired to get into the film industry because I worked for an international humanitarian group, and I went around the world. It was a medical group, and I was in charge of the film crews that came through to document our work. And I got very interested in that kind of thing with cameras and storytelling that way. And then I started to work with producers and production companies that were doing corporate media and branded content kind of things. It was not called branded content at that time. That's where I met Trevor in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And then an opportunity eventually came to me from a friend to embark on our own documentary, which was my first film. And, my advice is to work with people that are making the kind of things that you would like to make. There's a term, which I'm sure you know, it's called shadowing. You can shadow directors if you are lucky enough to get an internship that will allow you to observe how producers work, how directors work, how producers and directors work together. It's invaluable. Film school is fantastic. And also, I think equally as important is the hands-on training of being on a set. Spending one day on a set is so illuminating and instructive.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I also didn't I didn't go to film school. I went to Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, 23rd Chelsea, as an illustration major, and also worked on animation video productions with Marilyn doing industrials. But my advice is, if you can make it, do it. Don't wait. Don't ask for permission. That's something that I've never asked for. I've always had a vision, and I've always pushed forward on something to make it, because unless you have something that is a thing, that's how people know you. People know Marilyn because of Mad Hot Ballroom and because of Street Gang. And, you have to have an item to be able to share your vision with the world. So go out and do it, because that's the important part. Even on no budget, there's like 1,000 iPhones that have like awesome connectors and everything else. Production is so much more available now than it's ever been in human history, and there's no barriers anymore. And I know you always hear that, and everybody's always talks about that, but that's the way to do it. You make something that's your own, and you find that creative hook to be able to drive and tell a story and put forward an idea that inspires people or changes people. And
yeah. And I also want to add, because I feel for all of you students that are coming into this world, coming out of COVID, you don't have an opportunity to be on sets, you're doing virtual interviews, all of that is incredibly hard. Look for the resources in, your film festival community, for example, Sundance, New York Film Festival,
Center for Communications.
Yeah. But I mean, there's so much programming that is extremely inclusive, that is trying to help young filmmakers, filmmakers of color, to get grants and access to opportunity. And, I think it takes a little research, it's a little time, but there's a lot of people willing to help. And I think the other part is you're going to have to keep a day job. And that's okay. We've all kept a day job for a lot of years in the pursuit of knowing that you were doing what you're doing and ultimately getting to do what you love. And sometimes, you know, in the day job is also a lot of times things that you love as well, but that's okay. It doesn't diminish you as an artist. It just means that you know that it gives you what you need to continue on. So do whatever it is you need to do that, and know that it's all good and you'll get there.
And the last thing I have to say, Ellen already said it, I'm going to say it again. Take as many business legal classes as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Because it is the thing we all have to remember. It is the film business.
Yeah.
And that has helped us tremendously, coming out of some very corporate backgrounds and some big corporate backgrounds, doing, you know, a lot of big industrial stuff. You have to know that. You have to really just own it and be okay with it, and have that also be part of the fun, because it is fun putting a deal together and putting bids together and putting this whole world and coming up with something and budgeting. It should all be exciting. And I know it sometimes sounds like the numbers are gross and boring, but like, it's also like, that's where you're going to continue to do the work, is to take this big budget that you did, small budget that you did, whatever size it is, and then get that product in front of the world and have people love it. That's how you get to do another one.
Thank you. Danielle, take us home. You're the last questioner.
Pressure's on. Hi, everybody. So my name is Andy Jackson. I'm a student at Rider University in New Jersey. And my favorite characters have to be Baby Bear and Grover. So my question, I guess it is directed towards Marilyn. And it's, I guess, as an independent film director, were you able to focus solely on the creative aspects of directing, or did you also have to do the production side, like you guys were talking about, such as finances and location managing and all that type of stuff?
No, it depends on the production. On Street Gang, I did not have to think about, there was such a great team on this film that Trevor and Ellen were the executive producers and oversaw every aspect of it and provided me and everyone on the team with the tools that we needed to do our jobs. Lisa Diamond, who was a fantastic, fantastic line producer, took care of the day-to-day, everything related to each shoot, everything related to every aspect of post-production and keeping the office running on a day-to-day basis. That was this production. On my first film, I was making sandwiches for the crew and my partner was driving the van that we were going to location every day. We were picking up the camera person and our other PA, and you know, it runs the gamut, really. But on this production, it was a dream to be allowed to be just in my creative little world and share that with everyone, and also be so taken care of because the production itself was so well managed by an excellent team of producers.
Great. Danielle, thank you for your good question. I so appreciate it. And I want to thank all of the attendees for being with us tonight. This was for you, and we intended to make it as helpful as we possibly can, because we root for you. We want you to succeed.
Yes.
And to underscore something that Trevor just said a few minutes ago, if you believe in your story, go for it. The first 2 years of my work on Street Gang, the book, was completely self-financed, and it involved a lot of trips and a lot of nights and weekends and expense. But I so believed in my project, and I was so on fire to tell the story. And if you feel that fire, you gotta do it. A friend of mine sent me a card a few years ago that said, "When your heart speaks, take good notes." So if your heart is speaking to you about a story and that you're moved to pursue it, don't let anything stand in your way. And believe in yourself. Ask the universe for assistance, and ask the universe for strength and clarity and focus, because that's what it will take, you know? it really takes a very strong belief in yourself, your abilities as a storyteller. And as Trevor said earlier, it's as ancient as early humankind. We've been telling stories forever, and we will continue to tell stories forever. So I want to thank Trevor and Ellen and Marilyn for agreeing to come together tonight and share the journey of making Street Gang. And on the eve of it appearing in theaters nationwide, it is a great, great moment for us. And I want everyone to know that they'll be posting the recording of this session on the center's website. So please share it with those who were unable to attend. And I hope that we were able to deliver for you tonight in a big way, because that was our intention. And with that, I will say good night on behalf of all of us.